Now it's time for our analysis with Canadian staff bandmaster John Lam as he talks about Robert Redhead's Quintessence.
Well, John, thank you ever so much for joining us once again, your second appearance on Fully Scored.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
And in today's analysis, we're going to be having a look at a real iconic piece of Salvation Army repertoire, Quintessence, written by Robert Redhead. Listeners may be interested to know that the excerpts used in this analysis are taken from the Enfield collection, recording by Enfield Citadel Band. So I've just got a few contextual questions for you before we delve into the music of this piece. Could you tell us a little bit about when this piece was written and what it was written for?
It was written for the Melbourne Staff Band's 1978 tour of the United Kingdom and the Salvation Army's International Congress in London.
Fantastic. And how about yourself? When did you first come in contact with this piece of music?
When I came to the Salvation Army in the mid-70s, then later on discovered the Canadian Staff Band, started buying records. This was on one of the LPs that I bought, and then in the concerts that I was able to attend as a teenager, I heard the band play this on a number of occasions. And I think they used it quite a bit leading up to their tour of Australia in the 80s.
So I believe you worked with Robert Redhead in preparing this piece with the Canadian Staff Band.
Yeah, several years ago, he was a guest conductor for one of our anniversary weekends. And I think that was the last time we got to work with Robert. So I had the privilege of preparing the band for him to conduct. And I think that's also the last time I heard it live. Other than that, my experience with it would be when I played it many times when I was on bass trombone many years ago.
Fantastic stuff, and an excellent piece. And let's talk about what makes it such an excellent piece. Let's delve into the score. As ever, listeners can always find the score on the Salvation Army Music Index if they wish to follow along at home. So, John, could you talk us through this opening section first of all?
Well, in looking at the opening, I went to the Merriam-Webster dictionary to look up quintessence because there's always reasons for the titles. And a couple of them struck me here. The fifth and highest element in an ancient and medieval philosophy that permeates all nature and is the substance composing celestial bodies. That's quite a mouthful there. But I look at that, the fifth and the highest element. And another definition right beneath it in the dictionary is the essence of a thing in its purest and most concentrated form. And I think that's maybe more what Robert was getting at. But when I look at the opening, and we can just think of this as coincidence, and then maybe 10 years from now, it'll be a fact. But it strikes me that the first 6 bars are an extended 5 chord, finally a 5/7, resolving to a 1 chord at bar 7. And that's the fifth, as in the fifth element. And the first interval in what I think is kind of a medieval statement of original thematic material is also the first interval is a fifth. Probably coincidence, but those are the things you notice. And it has that kind of medieval feel to it, I think, in these first bars with a couple of statements in it. And it's very magnificent. And one of the things I like about Robert's writing is traditional harmonies are at the base of everything he does, but he's never afraid to use lots of color chords and open chords. And that's something that he mentioned was inspired by Brian Bowen. And I think it's just a bold statement of original motive, I think, or motif, that is one of the unifying elements that recurs through the piece to help it become what it is and becomes a satisfying performance.
And could you talk a little bit about what the narrative of the piece is doing here in the opening?
Well, I think the opening is, you can look at different score notes and people's notes on this. You think of that almost medieval sounding fanfare-ish type motive there. And it may be a reference to the immensity of the Australian continent, the vastness of the territory, and that's probably the truth.
And don't know how true this is, but I've heard one theory that this opening is meant to be describing the rumblings of a helicopter engine starting up and whirring around before we take off and see the vast Australian landscape. Is that something that you've heard before?
That would be, I could see that when you look at the triplet figures, starting in the euphonium, then into the baritone and the horn, finally into the cornets. Like I said, he's not afraid to use color and effects. There's lots of effects that are favorites of Robert's, and this is one of them. And I've seen this recur in other pieces of his, where there's a sense of excitement created by the rhythmic activity in the triplets and a sense of mystery and evolution. Not sure I see the helicopter, but like I said, why not?
Excellent stuff. So at section 7, we have this vast tune that permeates the whole piece in its first exposition here.
Where we arrive on that one chord and we have that interval of fifth and eventually going up to the octave. And I think that's just that medieval type statement of establishment and a sense of magnificence and sets the listener up for the story. It's almost like a fanfare leading to an overture to a good theater presentation where we're going to settle in now and we're going to hear something. And I think that it gets restated again at 15 before it settles down and the story starts at 31. I like how he at 24, again, using his open chords in the low brass from the first baritone down, and then leaves the upper half of the band to make a really bold statement of that theme so that the listener really by that point can't forget it there. And just the underlying harmonies are just rock solid. And so it is fully established now as a theme that you're going to be hearing throughout the piece. And again, at the end.
Fantastic. So that takes us through to 31. And on the score here, got noted a little note at the top of the music: Australians, all let us rejoice, and in brackets, advance Australia fair. What's going on here?
Well, that's the Australian national anthem. Did a little reading on it. I'm not going to recite it for you because I think they've changed some of the words recently. And this is the presentation and appealing to nationalism here, and with a sense of revere and then excitement when you see all the activity in the semiquavers in the cornets. And this is, I was actually noticing more after I prepared notes for this, how often he brings this first statement from the Australian national anthem back, whether it's in one of the middle parts in the horns, baritones, or on a xylophone right through in some of the most sensitive bits. What this does is remind everybody who this piece was written for. This is about the Australian Salvation Army, and it is relentless where he just drops this in 2 bars at a time. And I'm starting to notice more quotes of it as I become more acquainted with this score.
Fantastic. And we then have a key change at bar 42.
So yeah, now we're in concert C, and we have the first Salvation Army tune introduced in the form of the Glory Hallelujah portion from the Christian Mission. Also, in a very brief but energetic, accented call and response at first between various sections, kind of shouting it out to each other between cornets, trombones, and stuff like that, and just trying to get it off the ground. And again, like the opening motif, it evolves and then becomes established, where it's presented over basically a more established harmonic rhythm. And again, ending with a trombone euphonium reference to that opening motif. Again, kind of bringing in previous elements to give the work unity all the way through.
Excellent. And what can you tell us about the tune that is used? Glory, 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 hallelujah.
I can tell you that it's really hard to find the composer because it's anonymous. There's an arrangement by Ray Steven Allen, been recorded by anybody up to the King's Singers, and it'd be what you would really call a classic Salvation Army a song from the origin when the Salvation Army was first called the Christian Mission, and we still like to bring it out every once in a while in our corps and sing it through. Mainly Glory, Hallelujah, Hallelujah. And just one of those praise meeting types of inspiring choruses, and it exudes joy in our faith and in our mission, and I think that's important to how the Army is trying to establish itself in Australia at this time.
Fantastic. So, in some ways, the next musical chapter comes at bar 52, entitled "The City." Could you talk us through what the narrative is here and how the music displays that?
Well, so the Salvation Army first established in the city, according to this narrative, and it brings all three thematic elements into a kind of a frenetic portrayal of Australia's vibrant cities. And we're now in concert F, and the cornet choir is assigned a rhythmic variation of Glory Hallelujah, with the horns eventually bringing back fragments of Advance Australia Fair, the national anthem. And then the trombones and baritones bring back a 2-bar reference to the opening motif to close off this movement. And just in the preparation of this, just notice the underpinning rhythmic drive provided by snare and woodblock here. This is a Redhead favorite, trading off of 16th note passages, semiquavers, closely matching the cornet choir. I think this speaks to just the kind of frenetic nature, the enthusiasm, trying to get this thing off the ground in the context of the city. And there's a vibrance and an excitement all around this. That's what I'm hearing in the music at that time. Still struggling to become the whole tune.
Excellent stuff. Very exciting music indeed. At 74, we take a movement out of the city and into the countryside, as this part of the music is entitled. What's going on here?
You're at this point in the country, we have an idyllic portrayal of Australia's countryside. We're now in a nice calming key of concert D flat. And again, actually at this point with fairly thin scoring. And I find it, I'd have to take a closer look to see if he's using, inversion of some of the thematic material, because the references are harder to find until it actually gets up to the solo cornet section, just around bar 83 there. But it's a good diversion. I mean, everybody loves to leave the city and get into the country for a little bit of respite. And I think musically he provides that opportunity and still brings these themes and the Salvation Army really as part of the narrative to the countryside. And it's very idyllic and a nice elegant cadence at the end with a kind of a wistful scale degree 2-to-1 resolution there on the final note. And it's just a nice moment of repose, which musically, programmatically represents the countryside and the Salvation Army in it.
Fantastic. And a passing note for any solo cornet players: 2 bars before 91, first note should be a D flat, but written as a D natural there. One of the very, very few errors in any SPNS scores.
Is this where I show my age and say, well, I read it in manuscript? I used to hate it when guys said that. Now I'm one of them. I don't know when that happened.
Yeah, when is that change? It'd be interesting to know what year that takes place.
Exactly.
Excellent. So, 91, we venture into the outback. Can't get much more Australian than that for a title of a section.
No.
What's going on here?
This would be, from a bandmaster's point of view, maybe the toughest section to prepare when you consider that, unless I'm wrong, it was less than 10 years before that Army bands started to experiment with uneven times, like 7/8, 5/8, and things like that. Now you've got a section that is nothing but that. And my interpretation of this, again, the whole point of evolution, now we're taking the Salvation Army and the faith to the outback, and it's tough to get it going. So he's using 7/8 time. And as a side note here, for percussionists or for band leaders, if you're going to program a lot of Redhead music, you may as well get a good set of wood blocks and temple blocks right now. Make sure they sound great, because he uses them in so many pieces because he loves it. So here we are. That is the rhythmic ostinato setting things up at 91. And then we have this reference to the tune in a kind of uneven thing with these 3/8 intrusions, which I wish I had asked him about what those really meant. And this whole section from 91, with all kinds of little interjections and unevenness and stuff like that, leads us to 111. Now, you can prepare a band from 91 to 111 pretty well if they can internalize that 7/8 time and really own it, and then you can let them play it. And then at 111, we get the Sheep Shearers song, a traditional Australian song from the outback. And I have the words here, and I'm not going to read them because it might not be appropriate, but we have the tune that we use with that. So he's really doing literally a play on words here. And part of the humor in this is, while the entire band at 111 is taking through a grouping of 3 and 2 and 2 for the 7/8, the solo cornet is playing in reverse of that. So resign yourself now to just conduct the ostinato and leave the solo cornet on his own, figure it out. Bar 2 and 4, it's always going to be that 8th note to get to the next bar. It really has to be one of those well-prepared things where the musicians have to really, really own it for it to be successful, and to be confident in all the entries and really know the music.
But I love the little note on the score where it says he's suggested that the conductor ignores soloist and vice versa. Probably don't see that often.
Is that a note from somebody who is a previous conductor on the score, or it's in that?
He's printed it at the bottom of the page.
I concur. I conduct the ostinato, and the solo cornet is on their own.
And another thing that you don't see often is scoring for a swanee whistle in the percussion section.
Is that what you call it, a swanee whistle? We call it a slide whistle. And that's another thing I wish I could ask him about, that particular effect. I mean, we all know that he loves to use tempo blocks. We all know that he loves to write in 2/2, 3/2, 4/2 time. This I didn't see coming. And yes, we call it a slide whistle. And I'm sure they should have just given it to the trombones. That's my personal feeling. This is the Army trying to evolve here. And then at 119, the entire cornet section joins in that tune with lots of rhythmic, typical Redhead support, lots of triplet action in the horns. At 119, where you get a little bit more confident rendition of the theme there. And then that leads us to 128, where, and I've seen it in some score notes, 128 through to the next slow section represents the Army is now established. We started in the city. We're out in the country. It's beautiful. The outback might have been a challenge. We can hear that in the 7/8 time and the awkwardness of it. But at 128, there's a confidence and an anticipation building.
At 151, we have the first iteration of the tune At Thy Feet I Bow Adoring, a really stunning tune. Could you first of all tell us a little bit about that melody and the words associated with it, please?
I think the tune was written by a couple of Australians, unless my sources are wrong. But the piece up until now has been about excitement. It's been about evolution, maybe a little bit of struggle, a lot of excitement. The character of the Australian people, the busyness of the Salvation Army, the mission. And here, I think it's now time to settle in to establish the actual sacrifice that it takes to do this work and to be a follower of Christ. And so here we are, we're in concert after, we're in 3/4 time, and the horns followed by the trombones present the words, "At thy feet I bow adoring, bending lower, lower still, giving up my all to follow, just to do my master's will." I'm just going to give a little aside here. I was privileged to have, back in 2016, a lot of time with Robert. He was on our bus when we were on the West Coast for an event out there. And I think when I was younger, and even a younger bandmaster, we revered him so much that he was almost unapproachable. And it turns out he's one of the most approachable people ever, even with a really great sense of humor. But not afraid to talk about some of the more difficult things. And I am projecting this on him a little bit from a conversation where he told me that it was never his intent to be in music ministry as part of his officership. And he arrived at a point where he decided to go into the work. And he said, "I played all the big pieces. I played in the ISB. I really enjoyed it. But I put my instrument in the cupboard and I was off to training college and I was going to be a pastor." And we all know that that wasn't God's plan for him. And even on the humorous side, I mean, we would look at him and say, wow, after 9 years, how sad is that you had to give up the Canadian Staff Band and take an appointment on the West Coast? And he said, "John, there's a picture of me handing the baton over to Brian Burdett. At the end of that 9 years, that smile is genuine. I desperately wanted to carry on, as a pastor, and music would always be part of my ministry, but that is what I felt called to do." And I think his choice of this tune and these words in 1978, "Giving up my all to follow, just to do my master's will." It was his master's will that he would be a musician and affect all of our lives with such powerful music. And I think that was a sacrifice for him, because I don't think it was his will that he would do that. When you look at the accompaniment of this, it's based as much on color as it is on harmony. And absolutely, the accompaniment has to be subservient to the singularity of this melody, because it's very haunting and very challenging. So the cascading figures unfolding in the cornets, they provide such an elegant and transparent backdrop for a tune that I think in this setting struggles to resolve the last word, "Giving up my all to follow, just to do my master's will." And what it does resolve, it always resolves quietly, and it's hesitant, not as hesitant as in Les Condon's piece, The Present Age, where there's a full stop. It's not as dramatic as that, but there is a hesitation in that final statement, "Giving up my all to follow, to do my master's will." And so I think this section, if you're preparing this for a band, this requires deep knowledge of the words. It's a one-verse song. It is what it is. And the musicians have to have a well-developed musical maturity in order to have its full effect on both the performer and the audience. And so aside from that, what makes this so effective, because the piece has been so exciting and full of rhythmic activity and call and response and unevenness and everything like that, this is a real interruption to that with something very, very pristine and challenging, and from a faith point of view as well as a musical point of view. So this is one of the most powerful, I won't call it a middle movement because it's not, it's a moment where he's forcing us to really think about why are we doing all this? The Salvation Army is a worldwide organization, but every once in a while we need to sit down and face these words. And I find it a personal challenge. I don't know if I meet the moment every day where I'm giving up all to follow my master's will. So I've always been deeply moved by this, and so I hope listeners are as well as they get exposed to this, hopefully into the future.
Thank you. And thank you for that challenge as well for us all. So 178, we have just 3 bars that transition us from the calm and the serenity that you've just been speaking about back into vivace e scintillante.
Scintillating and move it.
Yeah.
Yep. At 181, we're collecting our things here. We've got all the themes, hallelujah, glory, hallelujah, again in the euphonium, moving at a tempo of 176. A couple of repeated sections here. Again, lots of frenetic rhythmic activity, more call and response at 197, repeats back. It's kind of like charging it up and getting it off the ground. And building into 203, we have the little grace notes in the soprano and solo cornet, just another little variation on the tune there, having a bit more fun with it. A little bit of scale fireworks in some of the baritone and horn parts. And then leading to more call and response, 6 bars before 214. Any listener who's been taken in by a band piece like this and many others, they know what's happening here. You know the tune is coming back, and it works every single time. Redhead, 9 times out of 10, is going to put it in 3/2 time and bring the tune back in an augmented fashion with quotes from other tunes above the top. So this whole section here is kind of like packing up. We're getting on the bus. We're taking this thing to the final stretch. Here it comes. So now we're back in concert D flat, and we have this very triumphant recapitulation of my master's will. And this time, if you look at how the tune rolls out, and again, almost in a Vaughan Williams-esque type of way, because now we're in 3/2 time where you can augment the tune and still be able to build in between percussion and cornets, lots of rhythmic activity to give it a sense of contrast and bring the other tunes into it, just as a reminder, because that is the unifying element. He always uses all of the themes that he's presented. What strikes me in this one, the tune is proclaimed by the trombones, upper horns, and then back row cornets in augmentations. That's actually a very powerful choir voiced within the band. Nobody's going to have to force that. It's just going to roll out in an overwhelming way. At 236, it strikes me that the cornets take over here, my master's will, and brilliantly presenting giving up my all to follow. I think that's very poignant that those are the words they're presenting at that point, and you can't miss it. It's in a different range, and it is played with absolute resolve and passion. There's no hesitation. There's no thinking about it here. So we've established that now, that this is the sacrifice in our life as a Christian and as a salvationist. We have to deny ourselves and giving up our all to follow. And so that statement is very powerful to me, and I think it's very powerful to listeners, accompanied by lots of fireworks underneath and triumph and stuff, unified from the flugel down to the second baritone and the euphoniums, that choir there, and with some exciting syncopation underneath it, and again, the block chords and the basses.
Some symmetry here in the music, as we hear a very similar sounding idea to the opening coming back again.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And you'll notice also the open chords. I think that's something Redhead joked with me about. There were things back in the day that weren't allowed to be written in case a piece sounded too rhapsodic or something like that. And it was when Brian Bowen wrote that famous open chord near the end of My Comfort and Strength, he said that was permission for him to use the same effect. And here it is, even just from baritones down to the tubas. But we all know from Corpus Christi, he's obviously used the whole band in voicing things like that. And again, other than the snare drum activity underneath it, this is very expansive. You got the top half of the band with the original thematic material, block chords, again, representing establishment. And then out to, in the third last bar, a final quote of the Australian national anthem, and then a percussion break, and then a final open chord just to give it a brilliant finish.
Fantastic and amazing music. And thank you ever so much, John, for sharing that analysis and for all of your work preparing that for us.
It's actually been a little bit of an emotional and spiritual journey to revisit it, maybe in more depth. So thanks for giving me this opportunity. And I hope I've provided some useful insights for anybody planning to program it in the future.